have given a number of presentations to you folks. I think this one is perhaps the most important one I've done. So thank you for coming. And please think about what you're going to hear today and talk about it with your friends and neighbors. We're going to talk about something that come to my attention through a book that was recently written by a couple of fellows. It's called The Tyranny of the Minority. And its basic premise is that United States politicians, mostly on the right, are welcoming anti-democratic extremists. And part of the problem with this whole situation actually lies in our Constitution that our founders gave to us. So we're going to talk about evidence that there is a crisis in our democracy and why our crisis is more severe than any other. We're going to talk about the deficiencies in our Constitution that are causing this attack on our democracy to be supported and what we need to do about it. So clearly, we are having some trouble in our democracy. 10 years ago, let's talk about this group called Freedom House, which measures democracy across the world. This is not the only group, but this is the one that I've got today. They had us up at a rating of 94 10 years ago, which was right up there with all the other modern Western democracies. This year, our rating's 83, which is lower than Argentina. And it's really no surprise when you see there are widespread efforts amongst many states to restrict voting rights. There are violent threats against election administrators and election workers. And we had a sitting president who tried to overturn an election that he lost. And this is not the only group that measures this stuff. The Economist also measures democracy. And for years, they have called the U.S. a flawed democracy. And it's just getting more and more flawed. Actually, the flaws in our democracy are what's helping to enable this. And you see, this is really weird. Rich democracies don't usually die, nor do old ones. Yet here we are. We're the oldest Western democracy. We're the richest Western democracy, but still our democracy in trouble. How did we get here? There's one real reason why we're here. The real reason why we're in trouble is because amongst all nations, we are a nation that is about to become a true multiracial democracy. Most other nations have a dominant racial group, the French, the Germans, the Swedish. We don't have, we have a barely dominant racial group, white Christians, that are losing their minority, their majority status. That's never happened to any country. There's never been a country where the previously dominant racial group has lost or given up their majority status. And to put it simply, the real problem with transition is that the people that are losing control of the country don't like it. The white Christians, they feel like they're losing the country they love. And you know what? In a way, they're right. They are losing the country they want, but they've always been losing the country our founders created. Our founders created a country designed to be run by powerful white men, for powerful white men. Our founders were the richest men in the country. They owned land, they owned business, they don't even own people. And they designed a government on this continent that they could control. Yes, I know they said all men are created equal, but they only let white male landowners vote, and they only let the half of the government, half of the legislature was controlled by the Senate. The Senate wasn't even elected when the founders created this country. The Senate was appointed by state legislatures, by themselves, the white male landowners. So the country the founders created was a country that a minority, the minority being the white male landowners, could control, because they wanted a country they could control. And we've been losing that country, so to speak, for decades. We've modified our constitution so that all citizens get to vote. We modified our constitution, the Senate's elected. We've made a lot of changes. And all those changes have moved us away from the country our founders created. We did this by amending our constitution, by passing laws, and most people in this country think these are good things, think that we have been building a more perfect union. When we make the changes that take us away, that lose the country the founders created. But some folks don't respond that well to losing the country the founders created. There's a small minority of white nationalists who don't like these changes. They see now that their white Christian race is becoming a minority in, quote, their own country, and they're determined to stop it. Just gone too far for them now. You can see how they're responding. A defeated leader who attempted to overthrow the election, he lost, is being nominated as their presidential candidate again. And this is all because at root, they don't want to see this country change into what it's changing into. The GOP is supporting, leveraging this reaction, and they've been doing it for a long time. They're not really trying to kill democracy. They're just trying to win an election. But in leveraging this fear of the white Christians losing their majority status, they are working to kill our democracy. They don't accept the results of the election. They flirt with political violence. They refuse to break with forces that threaten our democracy. Even now, they're having a hard time deciding whether they're going to take Jordan, who is a real Trump supporter, and make him the head of the House. Why is it that the GOP can do these things, can appear to be attacking our democracy and get away with it? Well, it's mostly because that small minority of our white Christian nationalists are so frantic about losing their country that anything is okay with them. Anything. Overturning the Constitution is fine with them. It's been going on for a long time. It started slowly, but between 60 and 80, the Southern strategy was basically appealing to white Southerners on a racial basis, helped them win elections many times between 60 and 80. But as the white population becomes more and more pronounced, so as the whites become more of a minority, they panic more. They find that this strategy of appealing to racial fears isn't enough to win an election anymore. So they really feel like the last thing they can do to keep control of their country is slipping away, and they need to do something else, even if it's force, to stop their country from slipping away from them. And we see that right now. We see Trump saying immigrants are poisoning the blood of our nation. We see real political leaders calling for a civil war, and we see a bunch of people in this country looking towards a post-constitutional dictatorship to save the country they think they need to have. Trump said, nobody's going to deal with these people coming from. We know they come from prisons. We know they come from mental institutions and insane asylums. We know they're terrorists. Nobody has seen anything like this before in our country. It's a very sad thing in our country because it's poisoning the blood of our country. Wow. That is something that Trump recently said. We have it on film. And I'll be sure there's nothing new about Trump attacking those seeking a better life here in the U.S., but poisoning the blood of our country, that's pretty new. That's getting radical. There's a link there. I'm going to send these slides out. You can follow the links. You can see that I'm not just blowing smoke here. I've got proof of everything I'm saying. Fox News suggests this guy Goodfield, who hosts the Five, he said we had a war over slavery. We knew slavery was bad. We couldn't get rid of it except for war. Well, now we're losing our country, and we need a war to make peace. It leaves you with the need to make a war, to bring peace between the two sides. Because you have one side, he means the left, that can't change. And that means that the only way out of this is for the right to force the left to surrender and allow the right to retain the country they used to have. I'm not making this up. This is stuff that's actually happening. There's a process called Red Caesar. It's a right-wing code, and they've been talking about it for a decade now. And now some Republicans are listening. This guy, Kevin Stack, published an article claiming that what we need to do is we've already lost the country the founders created. And what we need to do now is get rid of the Constitution and put in a dictator who can make this country what it used to be. What does that mean? Back when a small minority of white Christian landowners ran the country. And the people who track extremism say that this is really starting to gain some traction within right-wing intellectuals. This guy, Linker, who's a prof at the University of Pennsylvania, offers several books on the American right. 30 years ago, if I told you a bunch of billionaires, intellectuals on the right are waiting in the wings to impose a dictatorship on the United States, you would have said I was insane. But it's not insane anymore. It's real now. There are people out there who want to do this. And the only question is, will we give them the chance to do it? Now, I said that the Constitution is part of our problem. The structures the founders gave us are part of the problem. Why do I say that? Well, most of our citizens do support our evolution into a multiracial democracy. I mean, you heard just today, you heard what Biden was saying, how we, as a principle, want to have all people be equal. They should all have the same rights and they should all have the same votes. But our Constitution makes it possible for this dwindling Christian white minority to resist those changes effectively. The U.S. Constitution allows partisan minorities to thwart the majority. The Constitution has counter majoritarian provisions, and you combine that with geographic polarization we have now, and that's locked us into a crisis with a possible minority rule. See, the founders were a minority. They were, yeah, they were the richest man on the continent. They owned land and businesses, people, but they were still a minority, and they wrote the Constitution that enabled that minority to run this country. And people like me have been worried about minority rule for years now. And you see how it comes about. Republicans have won the popular vote and only won the last 8 presidential elections, and yet they have had the win in 3 electoral college victories. That's a minority ruling the country. The Senate is an even bigger problem. It gives more power to small rural states than large urbanized ones. And it's made even less democratic than that by the filibuster. Then we have an unaccountable Supreme Court with its right-wing majority, which is gutting the Voters' Rights Act and gutting other rights. And the reason that Republicans get away with this is because they don't need to win over all the voters to win the most votes. They've got gerrymandered majorities in many red states. The Electoral College can give them the win whether they have the majority of votes or not. So they feel like, well, we don't have to reform. We can keep winning like this. Is our Constitution really that different? Well, in a way it is. You see, we had one of the very first constitutions. And a lot of other constitutions came after that, looked at what we did and improved upon it. So all democracies have some counter-majoritarian institutions to stop popular passions from running roughshod over minority rights. And you can't just let the majority do whatever the heck they want. But our system is unique in the way it empowers a minority to override everybody else. You know, conservatives like to pretend that their structural advantages arise from judicious wisdom of the founders, but many of the least democratic aspects of our government are just the result of it just worked out that way. There was a contingency we had to deal with, and most of all, capitulation to slaveholding southern states. In fact, our Constitution is the most difficult to change of all modern Western countries, and that's a big part of our problem. Now think about how a democracy should work. The founders supported the principle that all men are created equal and all men should be equal under the law, even though they didn't themselves really live that way. But our Constitution has embodied that principle as we've amended it. We've amended it to the point where everybody should have a fair voice in our country. You don't have to be a white male landowner to vote. We definitely call for representative democracy. We've changed the Senate so it's elected, not appointed. But for a democracy, a representative democracy to really work, number one, the person who gets the most votes has got to win. And secondly, when he wins, he's got to be able to implement the policies he ran on. I mean, you vote for somebody because he says he's going to work for a better gun control, or he's going to work for better health care, or whatever. When he gets in, if he can't do those things, our democracy is broken. The way democracies are supposed to work is you vote for the winner, and the winner gets to do what you voted for. How do we fare on that? Heck, the Electoral College can cause the loser of the presidential election to win. The minority could block the legislative will of the majority. Because, first of all, the Senate's not proportional to the population, and because of the filibuster, it requires a supermajority to do anything. And our Supreme Court has far too much power to undermine the will of the majority. And these constitutional constructs are not carefully planned balances that very wise founders created, they were concessions to smaller states, to slaveholding states. They were concessions necessary to get the states to ratify the Constitution. You can see that when you read the papers that the founders have left us. They created a constitution, then they had to convince everybody, and they had to make concessions. All of the Bill of Rights were not in the original Constitution. They were concessions that the founders had to agree to add to the Constitution to get the states to ratify it. All the Bill of Rights. So the bottom line is, our Constitution was designed to protect a ruling minority, white male landowners, from the majority. So the founders wanted them not to have an overpowering say in our government. That structure is making our matters today worse because it's protecting the white Christian reactionary group, which is resisting the evolution of our country. And it's difficult to change this. These negative structures that threaten our democracy, they're entrenched by upholding the white minority that feels threatened. The sparsely populated states get a huge bias in our country because of the Senate. And now that U.S. parties are split along rural and urban lines, the sparsely populated states are almost all GOP, which means that now the imbalances in our structure all contribute to the power of one party. I mean, there used to be a time when you had blue small states and red small states, but now most of the small states are red. The imbalance that we have built into that got built into our structure is all contributing to the power of one party. Okay, and that means it's difficult to change because it all accrues to one party now. We have kind of self-sorted into red states and blue states, low population states and high population states. And the fact that low population states get more power in the Electoral College and in the Senate means that the GOP has more power than their popular vote would provide, which allows them to deny the policies that are popular in the majority. It helps them tilt SCOTUS to the right. And the fact that they can continue to win without attracting the majority of voters means our democracy just isn't working at this point because the GOP does not need to rein in their extremists to win. And so that's all self-reinforcing. The GOP wins despite losing the vote. They pack the SCOTUS to the right. SCOTUS supports their methods by diluting voting rights, supporting gerrymandering, returning power to undemocratic states. It's a self-reinforcing cycle that we're facing here. Now, other countries have avoided these problems. Most Western countries have built a better constitution than we have here, with more proportional democracy. They've moved more to the popular vote. They put in term limits for their high courts. It's only our democracy which has refused to make these revisions. There was a long time when we made amendments to our Constitution to help our country be more democratic. But over the last 40 or 50 years, it's been really hard to modify the Constitution. And that's in large part because a lot of people didn't like the modifications we made. And the fact that other countries have started with a better Constitution and improved it, whereas we've stopped doing that, that's why our democracy is weaker than most modern Western nations. And it can be very hard here. I saw this on social media the other day. A guy from India says he used to think he was in a diverse country with Sikhs and Muslims and Indians. And he came to New York, and he says, wow, look how diverse your country is. I used to be proud of my diversity, but here, people from every race you never even hear of existed, every religion, every gender, every form, somehow they all blend together, which most of us think is wonderful. But it's also different from any other country. And that's the challenge we faced, trying to make this work here when no other country has made it work. No one country even tried to make it work. So there's some steps we need to do if we're going to improve our democracy. And I'm going to list the ones that I see. Getting rid of the Senate filibuster, reinforcing our voting rights, eliminating political gerrymandering, expanding SCOTUS to restore balance. These are going from easy to hard, harder and harder, adding term limits to SCOTUS, eliminating the Electoral College. Oh, the hardest one, making the federal Senate proportional. The SCOTUS made every state have a proportional state Senate, but they couldn't make the U.S. do it because it's in the Constitution. And we can do these things, 1 through 5. Eliminating the filibuster, reinforcing voting rights, eliminating gerrymandering, expanding SCOTUS, even adding term limits to SCOTUS, we can do without modifying our Constitution. Now, I'll get into that because some people believe we can't do that, but we can. Point six, to be done properly, eliminating the electoral college really requires a constitutional amendment. We can get partway there to the popular vote interstate compact. That last point, making the Senate proportional, we can't do that. We can't do that because our Constitution gives us the power to amend the Constitution, but it restricts that power. It says no amendment may reduce any state's representation in the Senate. Well, it must have equal, not qual representation. And we may not amend that. But we could move all the power to the House, as England did a long time ago. So let me talk about that. We really could expand SCOTUS if we wanted to. There's no magic about 9, not in the Constitution. Originally, it was 13, one from each original state. I'm suggesting, and I'm not the first to suggest this, that maybe we should have 12, one from each regional federal circuit and appeals court. And that would force a measure of diversity on the court. And it would allow us to rebalance away from the extreme right-wing viewpoints we have now. And some people say, yeah, but if you have 12, you could have a tie. Okay, so give the Chief Justice 2 votes so that the Chief Justice could break a tie, similar to the way the Vice President can break a tie in the Senate. There's no reason we can't do that with legislation. We don't have to do a constitution in order to do that. And if you had these judges by region, you'd see a diversity throughout the nation because you'd see how different states are in different circuits. And you'd be getting people from each of these areas. It would automatically bring you some diversity into the Supreme Court and allow people to feel like they have representation in the Supreme Court instead of all the people coming from either Harvard or Yale. All the Supreme Court justices have come from a couple of big law schools. Even term limits are something we could do without modifying our Constitution. Yes, I know the Constitution says federal judges have a lifetime appointment, but it doesn't say that they have to stay in the same job for the rest of their lives. And they don't. Federal judges start at one level. They move up to an appellate judge. They move up to Supreme Court, maybe a few. But we could make another court. We could make a kind of a retirement court, something that's a senior advisory research body. And we could say, you know, after 18 years on the Supreme Court, you move to this other court. You're still a federal judge. You'll be a federal judge for life. You'll get paid, but you're not going to have the same power you had. And there's a precedent for that in our appeals court. If you're an appeals court judge and you get to where you really want to kind of retire, you can move to a voluntary role where you're not assigned cases. You can ask for a case if you see one you want to do, but you can be a judge and you can just kind of relax and not have to run any cases. So there's a precedent for this kind of thing. And we could do that with legislation. We don't need to modify the Constitution to do that. Now, the Senate is the one really big, and people are going to start to say, you can't change this, Ed. Well, we at least have to talk about it because this is the one big problem because it's still working the way the founders intended. It is still a way for a minority to deny the will of the majority. And if you remember what McConnell said when he was running the Senate, he said, the Senate is where bills go to die, and I'm the Grim Reaper. And he was right because the House passed bunches of bills that the majority of people wanted, and they all went to the Senate, and the Senate just said, nah, we're not going to consider that. So the Senate has always been what the founders intended it to be, a way to stop the majority from getting what they want. And the Senate's the big problem, which is why I had put getting rid of the filibuster up first, because that'll make other steps easier. But even without the filibuster, the Senate is not proportional to the population. 40 senators, it's really 41 senators from the 21 smallest states can just block anything. And the smallest 21 states, boy, I've got to fix these typos, are only 11% of our population. 11% of our population can block the will of the majority. You can get rid of the filibuster, and then it would be 51 senators from the 25 smallest states, 26 smallest states can block anything. And the smallest 26 states are 18% of the population. Even without the filibuster, 18% of our population can block the will of the majority. So the Senate is still doing what the founders intended, which was to be a blocking control on the House. And we can't change that. The Constitution doesn't give us the right to change the fact that the Senate has equal representation from each state. Every state gets 2 senators. There's nothing we can do about that. But we can do what England did. We could say that we move all the real power to the House. Don't let the Senate confirm things. Let the House do it. don't require the Senate approval for legislation. Just let the House pass legislation. Then the Senate can't block the will of the majority. And England did this a long time ago. They used to have the House of Commons that's elected and the House of Lords, which is appointed by Your Majesty. And in 1911 and 1949, they changed that to where the House of Lords veto pretty much went away. And the House of Commons, like our House of Representatives, were able to pass legislation without the approval of the House of Lords. And the House of Lords agreed to this change because the people of England wanted a stronger democracy. That's the kind of change that would take. And that's a long ways off. And we would need a constitutional amendment to do that. You can't do that with legislation. So since we're going to need an amendment someday, we probably should put in there the other stuff about the Electoral College, limiting gerrymandering, the SCOTUS term limits. And if you did all that stuff in the constitutional amendment, maybe 20 years from now, we might be able to build the will to do this. That would make our government more democratic. None of this is radical. Most other modern Western nations have already done all of this. But for us to do it, we would need to build a really broad coalition in defense of democracy, all the way from Liz Cheney to AOC. We got progressives who want what they want. They have to learn to compromise. We have moderates who can't accept the progressive point of view. They're going to have to moderate as well. They're going to have to compromise as well. It's not easy because how inflexible our Constitution is. The entrenched, self-reinforcing nature of the problem. But we have to be talking about this stuff. We have to be thinking about it. And the guys who wrote the book I talked about, that this presentation is based on, there aren't any shortcuts. There aren't any shortcuts. We just have to engage in a conversation about this stuff with our friends and families and talk about the fact that we don't have anywhere near the best democracy in the world. We need to improve it. And these are the kind of things we need to do, step at a time. And we have to do this. I mean, a lot of people think I'm naive for imagining we could do any of this stuff. But frankly, I think the people who think this will just work out without making some changes, they're the ones who are naive. This is not just going to work out for the good somehow. We're going to have to make some changes. You know, if maybe Trump's electoral college is fading, but he could still run. He could still run on a nakedly authoritarian platform. He could still be reelected with minority of the vote. And let me make it clear. There's two things we got to do here. One is make sure that doesn't happen. But two is try and improve our democracy so that we don't have the possibility of this stuff happening. The guys who wrote the book think that we face a high risk of serious, repeated constitutional crisis, an unstable regime, possibly with some violence. Maybe we'll win this time. Maybe we won't the next time. But unless we change our government structures, we're going to have this constitutional crisis over and over again as we get closer and closer to becoming a multiracial democracy. We have to have this discussion because we will transition to a fully multiracial democracy, or we won't be a democracy anymore. It's one or the other. And I want to make sure the first one happens. I want you to help me. You got to talk to your family and your friends about this kind of stuff. This is nothing. This is not something that's going to happen in a day or a week or a month or a year. This is something we have to work on. I'm intending to work on this the rest of my life. And we're all going to have to do that if we want this country to survive as a democracy. Here's the book that I based this on. Here's an hour-and-a-half video by one of the authors. I'll send these slides out. You guys can look at this stuff. And that's what I got. So I'm open to questions. And I'm expecting that a lot of people are going to say, Ed, what are you, nuts? But this is what we got to do. All right, who's got a question? Who's got a comment? Just
we have a couple comments in chat, questions on chat, and I think Jim McGrath has the first one.
Yeah,
Jim,
Ed, my comment was basically, it seems like we're getting back to the original rich guys running our government, because we've opened up all this rich guys being able to contribute and get candidates, get people elected to the government that they want. So it rather than call them the wealthy class, I'm trying to call them the ruling class, because they are the ones that are starting to run our government. Or maybe they've been doing it for a long time, and I'm just paying attention now.
Well, Jim, you know, that's partly true, but there aren't enough of them to elect a senator or a House rep. What they're doing is they're leveraging the fear of white Christians who feel like they're losing their country to get them to vote for the things that will save their country from liberal Democrats who want to destroy their country. So yeah, they're using their money to send their messages, and they're supporting a party which is in it for the rich white folks, the rich business owners, aren't really doing anything to help poor Southern citizens, people who need health care, any of that. But the whole issue here is that they're appealing to this fear that people have that they're losing their country. If we had better government structures where it was easier for the majority to get their way, because the majority of our people like this stuff. The majority of our people don't want to see a small group of rich guys run this country. So a lot of the things we talk about here, defending voting rights, ending gerrymandering, those are things that that the GOP uses to continue to stay in power, even though they aren't a majority of voters. Strengthening our democracy will limit the ability of our oligarchs to run our country. Does that answer your question, Jim? Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, what's next?
Ken Olson had 2 questions. Ken?
A couple of observations. Kind of one thing about 30 some years ago when I started doing more work in Washington, well-known person working there told me that if you want to stop something, you work with Republicans. If you want to get something done, you work with Democrats. And I guess that's certainly holding true yet. And I guess one concern relative to putting more power in the House right now, what we're seeing happening in the House really makes that seem problematic as well as the Senate. On the Senate side, I wonder if rather than eliminating the filibuster entirely, you went to a talking filibuster so that that they had to be able to defend it. Right now, one person can basically put a hold on it. They don't have to do anything, and that stops it, like Tuberville is doing with the promotions for the military right now. So we certainly need some changes, but I guess I wonder if there are a variety of other things too we need to look at.
Well, but first of all, let me mention the thing about the talking filibuster. When a talking filibuster is in place, is occurring, nothing moves in the Senate. Nothing. The Senate is completely blocked. We moved to this kind of filibuster so that somebody deciding on a filibuster a law didn't stop everything in the Senate. But still, I'm going to ask you, why do we want a filibuster? Why do we want the minority to block the majority? I don't think we do. I mean, I know some people will say, hey, sometimes the blue side will be in a minority. Okay, if the people vote for red, then the people, then red should get to pass their laws. That's how a democracy is supposed to work. I don't worry about good programs being undone, because good programs end up with a life of their own. Good programs like Social Security and Medicare, the other side can get control. They still can't undo them because the population won't put up with it. When you put a good program in place and the population likes it, it's political suicide to undo it. So I just don't see any reason to have the filibuster at all. And I think we should just get rid of it. You got a comment there, Ken?
Yeah, well, I don't know. I think there are some cases where it does provide some balance, perhaps. And I don't think that that going away from the talking filibuster, I think going away from it really increased the number or the way that legislation is stopped, because right now one person could do it. If there's a talking filibuster, they have to be on the floor talking the entire time in order to have it. So it provides an opportunity, but it's not likely to stop things the way they're stopped now.
Okay, so I take your point that a talking filibuster would be used less than the filibuster we have now.
It couldn't tie things up the way it gets done now.
Well, it ties things up even worse when the talking filibuster is going on. Nothing, but that so the point.
Yeah.
The point I'm trying to make is I don't see a reason to have it at all. And I just it's just not part of a democratic structure. And the democratic structure, the majority within the bounds of the Constitution, within the bounds of the Bill of Rights, within the bounds of what is allowable, the majority should get to pass the bills they want to pass. That's how representative democracy is supposed to work, as far as I can see. Who else has got a comment?
I think that's it. I guess the current House gives me a lot of pause relative to giving them any more power than what they do now, because they can't, as they're structured now, they can't do anything.
Yeah, I agree. I think that that's simply a moment in time when Trump has broken the Republican Party, and the Republican Party can't get their act together. But I think that's just a moment in time. I don't expect that to last beyond Trump's lifetime. I'm trying to look here at the structure of our government as it is expected to run for the next 100 years, not the next month or two. So the kind of things I'm talking about here have to do not with winning the next election or getting a law passed for the Middle East or for Ukraine. What I'm talking about here is a structure of government that will avoid this continued constitutional crisis that we seem to be stuck in right now. Thanks, Ken. Who else has got a comment or a question?
Yeah, I've got a comment. Last night, I was at a program where Joyce Vance and Neil Katyal were there talking about a lot of these issues, mainly religious freedom. And their thoughts regarding the Supreme Court was that they didn't think that expanding the court was an answer, because no matter how many justices you have on the court, it can be an unbalanced court. So adding more justices doesn't necessarily solve the problem. And the reason why there's 9 now is because at one time we had 9 districts. Now we have more districts. They didn't think that was a solution. So it was a very interesting. They were very interesting talking to them, especially with Katyal, because he's probably argued more cases before the Supreme Court than any other person. He talked about a lot of things going on, and he said the court isn't balanced right now, but there are times when the court actually makes the right decisions, and times when the court makes the wrong decisions. And he's learned to deal with the court in some ways. Somehow, the way he brings things in front of the court, he's able to manipulate their decision making. So it was a fascinating thing. Now, originally the minority of the founders are worried about were the slaves. And at the time, it was a legitimate concern of the South, but now that once the slaves were freed, it no longer became relevant. So, I mean, all these issues still need to be resolved. So it isn't perfect, but it was a fascinating talk, fascinating to listen to them.
So did they have some suggestions for changes we can make in our judicial process, maybe the nominating process or the structure of the court or whatever, to avoid this situation we have now where the court is tilted very far to one side or the other?
Not really.
All right. Well, look, I'm going to submit that some suggestion is better than no suggestion. Okay. I mean, somebody could tell me expanding the court is not going to help, but I submit that expanding the court gives us an opportunity to rebalance it, and requiring that the judges come from different districts gives us a more natural inclination to have more diversity on the court. So I respect people who say, Ed, your ideas aren't any good, but I will challenge them to say, well, then you come up with some better ones, huh? And until somebody does, I'm going to keep saying what I do. When they come up with a better one, I'll adopt it if I agree it's better. But right now, I haven't heard anything better.
Ed, Kerry Shrug has he said he really doubted that the red states would agree to reducing the Senate's power. And first step, he says he would suggest is make electoral college fractional, proportional to the vote in the state, which can appeal to minorities in the small red states.
Yeah, I can address that. Let me address that right now. Right now, the way the electoral college works, if no candidate gets a clear majority of electoral college votes, then the Congress chooses the president instead of the people or the Electoral College. And they choose the president with one vote per state. So anytime we have a third party candidate that could dilute the vote and cause nobody to get a clear majority, you'd end up with a Republican president because there are more red states than blue states. This would have happened when Wallace ran if we had proportional representation. Proportional representation under the Electoral College is worse than what we have now, because it means that in many cases, it's even more likely that the winner of the popular vote would win and that Congress would choose the president. So proportional representation is no solution to the problem of the Electoral College. What else was in the top? Go ahead, Bill. What else was in there?
Okay, Sarah Overton says, made just a simple comment, make DC a state.
I'm all for that.
And Ori Pennant says, Citizens United established the behind-the-scenes structure to control our democracy.
Nope. That structure was in place long before Citizens United. The people, anybody who could hire a lobbyist and form a PAC could influence Congress greatly even before Citizens United. The Citizens United is fairly recent, but this has been going on for decades, for 40 years, and we can solve it with a legislation. We don't need a constitutional amendment. We can just pass laws which outlaw unlimited political money. So Citizens United made it a little worse, but Citizens United didn't start it. It started long before Citizens United. Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah. Okay, and then Vanita Banks said, make sure that you share your excellent PowerPoint. And I know you already had said that you would do that.
I will, but I will fix those typos in there.
Okay. And then V. Rice said, no reason at all the filibuster is needed. It was created to keep people of color out of office. And then Kaya Rubinstein says, Mr. Smith goes to Washington, 1949, I believe. This has been on TCM recently, numerous times. Everybody who can should watch it. That'll make your case in talking about the filibuster, Ken. And then she responded, she was off by 10 years. It was filmed in 1939. Okay. And
I just say, what I said in the last sentence, they don't make your case in favor of the talking filibuster, Ken. I mean, you see the talking filibuster, but then again, that was 1939 in Hollywood.
Yeah, but I understand the point that the talking filibuster would be less damaging to us than the filibuster we have now. I understand that. I just don't understand why we have it at all. What else you got, Bill?
That was it for the regular comments. I know that Ori is with us. Ori, you have any comments?
Thought it was an excellent presentation. I liked the analyzing and the graphics of it, and I do agree to some extent that you're right. Citizens United existed, but once it was formalized, and I say that as an attorney, slavery existed in Texas long after the law passed, so, till June 19th. So existing is not, for me, as much of structurally enabling it to be the law. And I say that as a lawyer. So once you structurally enable something to be as the law, for example, billionaires now can give money to judges and to other elected officials that they could not do before without visibly saying, yes, I gave money toward that election. So yes, it existed before, but formalizing it as structure, to me, diminishes the capacity of democracy. And we've seen that before. I mean, formalizing, we had voting rights, and taking that away and restructuring it so that it can be decided by different states is a way of structurally enabling the demise of a democracy. So yes, you're right. I mean, for that matter, discrimination existed forever before. But what I was referring to with Citizens United was giving it the legitimacy to continue in a way that for those of us who struggle with the law to try to adhere to it makes it even more difficult. I would argue right now, trying to legalize and fight for democracy, and I say that as a retired civil rights attorney, is probably as difficult as it was in the 40s and 50s.
Yeah,
And
I agree with you that Citizens United made it worse, but it was still happening even before that.
of course, that's how it got to the court.
Right.
Yeah, that's how they heard it, because it was happening before then. What I'm saying is before, and again, I don't want to be redundant. Yes, it was happening before. That's how it got to the court in the first place. But they legitimized it. They said, yes, you're doing it, keep doing it. And again, when that continues to happen, and I say that as a retired attorney and a person of color and a female, what it means is that as we fight, and I love the fact that you're right, we will be a multiracial, westernized country, but I also would argue Canada is also as well, but not as much. But we will not be structurally as all of us do not have equal power. And that is not just in terms of vote, that is in terms of where we live, where we have access to live, where we have access to work. So as we structurally work around being a interracial democracy, if that democracy and interracial is not equitable, then great, whoopee-doo. And that, and my lawyer friends in Canada remind me of that continually.
Mm-hmm.
So everything you wrote was absolutely correct. But I would argue from my lens, the fight is not just one of an interracial democracy, but is one of an equitable democracy.
Yes, absolutely. And my point is that the structures the founders left us with need to change for that to really come true, because it's just harder and harder to do this given the structures that we've inherited. So I gave you 7 or 8 points there, from eliminating the filibuster all the way down to moving power to the House from the Senate.
And going back to taking away the equal, I mean, if we don't do away with the electoral college, none of what we talk about as democracy will exist. I mean, the electoral college right now holds more capacity than the majority of voters in this country.
Absolutely. So some of these things are a little easier to do, some of them are harder, but we need to be working on this, work on the easy things, build support for the harder things. And we all need to recognize that our democracy is fragile and we need to strengthen it. And the kind of things they talked about here are what we really need to do over the course of decades, if necessary, to really form a more perfect union. Okay, who else has got some comments? We're 10 minutes over. I thank you all for hanging in here with me, but let's wrap this up if we have no other comments.
I don't see any more unless somebody wants to raise their head. I will say Ed and Jim formed ROD, which stands for Restore Our Democracy, and they have produced a lot of great videos and meetings. And if you go up to the NWSOFA.org website, we can see last week Ed did one on the broken bench, which was excellent, and a whole series of our different issue teams, etc. So I believe there's one up there also on civics, just teaching civics. So they've really come up with a lot of timely programs and have really added a lot to the NWSOFA program. And if you feel like getting involved, and I've seen a lot of folks attending a lot of these programs on a regular basis, just let us know what you'd like to get involved in. Ed did that a couple of years back. He says, I'd like to start Restore Our Democracy. I said, what's it going to be about? It's going to be about the issues of the day. So,
Hey, what about me? I got something I want to say.
Great job.
Go ahead, Jeff. What do you got on your mind, Jeff?
I heard everything, but there's no chance they could stop. Those guys can stop an army of progressives who want to run for office, like us.
I agree, Jeff. And I encourage progressives to run for office, but there's, no matter how many progressives we get in office, there's going to be a lot of people from small rural states that are going to elect people who aren't progressives to the Senate, and it's going to be a knockdown, drag-out fight. So yeah, of course, let's all get as many progressives in office as we can. But the cards are stacked against us in the way this Constitution is written, and we have to change the rules of the game if we're really going to have a multiracial democracy. Garrick has his hand up. Garrick, what did you want to say?
How much is the Democratic Party responsible for this dysfunction? And I say that because of the blue slip, the filibuster that you talked about. You know, we called Durbin's office to eliminate the blue slip, which is garbage. I've called them before about the filibuster. This isn't built in the Constitution. You know, how responsible is the Democratic Party over this?
Well, I have to say that in the Senate, these folks are resistant to change, and I think that people on both sides are resistant to change, and I think we have to push them. So we're all in for pushing on Durbin. Hey, I'll let you know that Indivisible Illinois had some people in Durbin's office yesterday pushing on these very things. The Democrat, there's a difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. The Republican Party is this wide. There's a bunch of moderates and there's a whole bunch of really, really right-wing people. The Democratic Party is this wide. We have a bunch of moderates, we have a bunch of conservatives, we have a bunch of really left-wing people, we have some communists, some socialists. The Democratic Party is a really big group of people with a lot of different views, much different than the Republican Party, which is all mostly conservative to really conservative. We have the opportunity in a Democratic Party to discuss things with more people, with more views, and our politicians tend to be more moderate. I mean, look at Biden. He's not a Bernie Sanders. He's a middle of the road kind of guy, and the middle of the road kind of guys tend not to want to shake stuff up so much as to get rid of the filibuster, for example. So the more progressive parts of the Democratic Party are going to have to push within the party to make this stuff happen, and that's one of the things that I want us all to be thinking about and taking a stand with our own representatives to encourage them. That's the way we were talking to Durbin about. We got to get rid of the blue slips. We got to look for ethics in SCOTUS and some other stuff. Does that address your?
Yeah, and prior to joining this webinar tonight, thank you for your presentation. I was listening to Patty Vasquez's show, and she was interviewing people from Wisconsin and the fight they're having up there with the vouchers and the privatization of their public school systems. It's just everywhere you turn, it's the Republicans just gnawing away at our social fabric of what we describe as democracy. And
yep.
I feel we're in a civil war right now, and not enough people are recognizing it. And I don't even know what to say to people.
Well, tell them what I just told all you guys. That's what you should say to people. That's why I'm here tonight. Yes, we're in they want it to be a civil war. They want to stop this country from evolving to a more perfect union. And it's an emotional civil war right now. I hope it doesn't turn into a violent civil war, but we have to help people understand what we're going through as a nation, and get them to take sides. Get them to say, yes, we should be a multiracial democracy. Yes, we shouldn't fear losing a white Christian majority control. We all believe that, most of us believe that's the right way to take this country, and we just have to get people to understand that's where we're going, and to forcefully support it and support the changes in our government that will allow us to do this. Jim's got his hand up. Jim, what do you want to say?
Yeah, I just want to say support for what Garrick just said about people don't realize what's happening over time. It's like the frog in the hot water kind of thing. You guys have heard that story? You put a frog, but that's what's happening.
Well, yeah, but look at Wisconsin. I think Wisconsin knows what's happening. Wisconsin elected a Democratic senator. They elected a Democratic governor. They elected a very liberal Supreme Court judge. The people of Wisconsin see what's happening in Wisconsin, what the Republicans are doing, and they're fighting back. And I'm really proud of the guys in Wisconsin that are doing that. And I'm proud of the people from Illinois that have helped them. And I have every hope that, given the new ratio on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, that we can see some progress on gerrymandering in Wisconsin, and that can help break the GOP stronghold on that state.
But
And
Ed, what you just said right there, is an example of this civil war that's going on. The Republicans are wanting to impeach this Jenna Quay. I always mispronounce it.
yes,
For no
I
reason.
know. They've given up on that. They've come to realize they can't make that happen, and that's one of the good things. I mean, I look at the U.S. House and the fact that Jordan can't get nominated. And I have some people telling me that the GOP are all nuts, and I said, well, they can't all be nuts, or they would have voted for Jordan by now, and he would have been running the House by now. But he's not. So we have some people on the right that are more reasonable than others, and we can find ways to make progress around here. I'm sure of that. I see it in what's happening in Wisconsin. I see it what's happening in the House, and we just have to work for it.
I tell you, I love the presentation, but I think I love the discussion more later. Ed, thank you so much. Great contributions. And if there's no more hands up, let's call this an evening. And Ed, what are you going to be presenting next week?
I'm not presenting next week.
I know. I was just trying to suck you in.
Talia, did you have something you wanted to say?
No, those were the applauding hands for you.
Oh, okay. Thank you all. Thank you all for hanging in here. I really appreciate your time, but don't just let this be the end of it. Talk about this stuff with your family and friends, and think about it. It's something we do need to work on over time. Good night, folks. Thank you very much.